More Singapore residents found jobs in higher skilled sectors last year. That is according to latest data by the Manpower Ministry. It shows the labour market continued to expand, with total employment up by 44,500. But analysts say trade tensions are weighing on this year's outlook, especially for jobs in external-facing sectors or those in the manufacturing and semiconductor fields. Risha Matthew with more.
Sectors like finance and tech hired more Singaporeans last year, bringing resident employment up to 8,800, reversing a decline the year before. That's partly due to a new system implemented in September 2024 to determine eligibility of foreign work passes.
If a hiring manager is faced with both local residence profiles and employment passes profiles, they will tend to go for the local residents first, feeling which if they cannot find a suitable candidate for the role, then they will open it up to foreign candidates.
Non-resident employment also grew, but at a slower pace, mainly driven by the hiring of work permit holders. As for retrenchments, it went up in the last quarter of 2024. This was due to higher business costs and large retrenchment exercises like Dyson and TikTok.
At the same time, they will start to rehire for new talents, for new jobs created by, for example, adoption of AI, or how technology could kind of recalibrate the job scope and the type of talents they need.
Overall, retrenchment numbers remain lower than in 2023, with more job vacancies than unemployed persons. For this year, the labour market is expected to expand at least in the first quarter.
Firms are trying to go into the digitalization journey with respect to AI, and that should continue to support IT job vacancies. And as well, on the healthcare front, Singapore's population is aging, and therefore there is still a continued need for more healthcare workers.
But further along the road, intensifying trade tensions could weigh down on Singapore's economic performance and therefore affect hiring sentiment.
The rising and elevated global trade policy uncertainty that will weigh on Singapore's external-oriented sectors and trade-dependent economy. So this might potentially, hurt some of the jobs in the external-oriented sectors such as manufacturing or wholesale trade.
Even then, MOM survey shows more companies expecting to raise headcount and salaries this year.
Associate Professor Walter Theseira joins me now for more analysis on the report. He is from the School of Business at the Singapore University of Social Sciences. Professor Theseira, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Now, we saw more residents hired in higher skilled sectors in 2024. Is this a good indication that our manpower needs are being met?
Well, this is actually a continuation of a shift over the last few decades towards much higher skill resident employment. And that's because, today, half of younger Singaporeans actually hold a degree or higher qualifications. The majority of our resident labor force are PMET. So we can actually expect that this shift will continue because as resident employment changes, as older Singaporeans age out of the labor force, they're basically being replaced by younger Singaporeans who are much higher skilled. And you see this when you look at the sectors which are growing, the sectors which are declining for resident employment. Growing would be things like finance, health services, professional services, IT. Declining for residents would be things like food and beverage services, admin and support. So somewhat lower skilled sectors are declining for resident employment, probably reflecting this cohort shift that has been going on.
So you're saying it's being helped by our efforts to upskill workers?
Well, actually, for upskilling, right, I think the primary beneficiary of that would be younger Singaporeans who have much more opportunities to obtain higher skill education today than, their parents or grandparents were, right? Again, we look at about half of younger Singaporeans acquiring a degree at some point, and about, I think, 30% of the cohort actually getting a benefit of a government subsidized degree in the first instance. But when we look at, let's say, older Singaporeans who are trying to change niche industries or jobs. We don't quite know much about upskilling there yet. We do know that if one is unlucky and gets retrenched, you have a pretty good chance of coming back to the labor market. More than half come back between 6 months, and many of them actually come back to a different industry or role. But we don't know yet whether that's because of upskilling, whether that's a better job and things like that. We need more data and research actually on that issue.
Meanwhile, Professor Theseira, retrenchments picked up in the last quarter. How concerned should we be about this? And is this something that you're expecting to continue?
Well, retrenchments in Singapore are actually quite volatile quarter and quarter, and that's because of lumpiness. If we have a major employer which has a big restructuring exercise, that may contribute a few dozen, maybe a few hundred retrenchments, and that is a big change because our baseline numbers, retrenchment, are actually quite low in Singapore. If you take a bit of a pullback, you look at the overall trend of the data, I'd say there's nothing alarming yet because it's very consistent with the retrenchment experience in Singapore in the 2010s outside of economic crisis and things. So it's pretty normal so far, but of course it has to be monitored carefully.
Having a higher job vacancy ratio to retrenched persons sounds like a good thing on paper, but do we have any idea if the available jobs are in higher or lower skilled roles?
Yeah, so that's a great question. MOM actually does publish vacancy data broken down by skills category and also broken down by industry type. And when you look at that, it's quite interesting because what you see is that there's higher than average demand vacancies open in the high skill category. So that's for PMEDs in Singapore, as well as in some sectors which are known to have a lot of high skill, high paying jobs. So we're talking about things like IT services, legal, accounting, management, public administration, health and social services. So, these are high-paying professional sectors and they have got vacancy rates which exceed the typical vacancy rate. So I think that's a good sign at the moment.
Okay, an MOM survey shows that more companies are expecting to raise headcount and salaries this year. But what's your take on wages given the uncertain economic outlook?
Right. So as you point out, it is actually a mixed picture because I think everybody who's been watching the news recently knows that it's kind of chaotic geopolitically with possible trade wars and so on going on. But balanced against that, we do have the MOM data, which shows that employers are becoming more optimistic in Singapore, more likely to be hiring and raising wages this coming year. So I would say that as long as employment continues to be tight, and so far data shows that it is reasonably tight, employers would have to raise wages. Now, I think one other data point is that recently the graduate employment survey for fresh graduates came out. And that showed a mixed picture because although the full-time employment rate fell a bit for fresh graduates, wages continued to rise. So that may say that, although it might take a bit longer to find a job, that job is actually still high quality and it's getting actually better as well.
What manpower strategies should Singapore adopt to continue to diversify our workforce, attract foreign investments and avoid stagnation in key industries as we move forward?
Well, that's a very big question, but I think a very short answer is we should continue what we are doing. If you look at, for example, Budget 2025, that continues to support R&D and economic transformation of a business, but it also continues to support Singaporeans to upskill and train. This year, we've got Job Seeker Support Scheme coming in soon. If you're unlucky and get retrenched, it gives you that cushion, a bit more money to tide by. But why that's important is that it gives you time to look for better jobs or consider training. And you can also take advantage of more training grants and so on if you go for longer form training programs. But besides all of this, I think to remain an attractive destination for foreign business and investment, we do have to have careful management of foreign manpower, especially in emerging areas where we need more time for the Singapore core to actually catch up. We need to ensure that if we get these big investments into Singapore, we kickstart them immediately. And while we wait for the Singaporeans to skill and train and catch up, we're able to satisfy some demand, at least with the foreign manpower. So it's about growing the entire economy together with the foreign manpower, but also, of course, to benefit Singaporeans first and foremost.
Okay, appreciate your insights. Thank you so much, Professor Theseira. Associate Professor Walter Theseira there from the Singapore University of Social Sciences.